Darren King's breath formed clouds in the frigid Montana air as he loaded his mail truck before dawn on December 23rd. At 24, he possessed a quiet determination that set him apart from other carriers at the Pinewood post office. While others complained about winter routes, Darren viewed each delivery as a personal commitment, a philosophy instilled by his grandfather, a Navy veteran who raised him alongside his single mother. His grandfather had always said, "Respect doesn't need a badge, it just needs the right action at the right time." That winter morning, the weather forecast predicted the worst blizzard in 15 years. By mid-morning, snow was falling in thick, relentless sheets. Most businesses closed early, and state officials urged residents to stay home. But the mail carriers of the United States Postal Service continued their routes, forming lone tracks through the increasingly treacherous roads. Darren's route covered the northern outskirts of town, an area challenging even in good weather, with scattered homes nestled against foothills that quickly became impassable when storms hit. As Darren neared the end of his route, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the pharmacist at Pinewood Drugs. "Darren, Walter Deering needs his heart medication refill. We can't get a delivery service out there in this weather. He's 87, lives alone on Cottonwood Lane. Called, sounding desperate." Darren knew Walter vaguely, a tall, gaunt man who rarely spoke, but always nodded respectfully when collecting his mail. Sometimes he wore his old Navy cap, though it looked too large for his shrunken frame. Darren quickly texted back, "Did you call emergency services?" "They said no ambulances until roads are cleared. Could be days," came Sarah's reply. Darren felt a twinge of urgency. He knew the area well, and he could tell Walter's situation was critical. He pulled over and studied his route map. Cottonwood Lane had already been deemed impassable, but Darren remembered an old logging trail that cut through the forest behind Walter's property, about 3 miles on foot. Difficult terrain, but walkable for someone young and fit like himself. He quickly called emergency dispatch, hoping his USPS credentials might prompt a quicker response. "I'm sorry, but we simply can't risk personnel in these conditions," the dispatcher said. "Once the main roads are cleared, we'll check on residents in outlying areas." "This man needs medication now," Darren insisted. "I understand your concern, but our protocol is clear. We can't send anyone until it's safe," the dispatcher replied, and the line went dead. Darren sat motionless, watching the snow accumulate on his windshield. The temperature was minus 20 degrees and dropping. At the post office, he approached the pharmacy counter, where Sarah worked part-time. "Is this Walter's medication?" he asked, pointing to a white paper bag with Deering's name. "Yes, but wait," Sarah said, her eyes widening as Darren took the bag. "What are you thinking? You can't possibly—" "I know those woods," Darren said. "There's a way through." His supervisor, Frank, overheard and stepped forward. "Absolutely not, King. Your route is done. Go home like everyone else." "If that was my grandfather out there, it's not your job," Frank cut him off. "We deliver mail, not medical services." Darren hesitated only briefly before tucking the medication inside his jacket. He grabbed his emergency pack, always ready with extra layers, a flashlight, energy bars, and a thermal water bottle, which he quickly filled with hot coffee. "You leave this building, you're suspended," Frank called after him. "I'm not joking." Darren paused at the door, snow already building on his shoulders. If he dies waiting for someone to follow protocol, could you live with that? "I couldn't." His co-workers watched in disbelief as he disappeared into the white void, the storm swallowing his figure within seconds. There are decisions that don't need approval. They just need to be made before it's too late. The logging trail that once seemed familiar to Darren quickly became alien under winter's transformation. Branches hung heavy with snow, creating ghostly archways through which he trudged. Each step sank him knee-deep into the powder. The wind cut through his layers, finding every seam and opening. Despite his preparations, after the first hour, his legs burned from the constant resistance of deep snow. After the second, his face had gone numb despite the scarf wrapped across his mouth and nose. He checked his phone for GPS confirmation, but the signal had disappeared, along with any trace of civilization. Nothing existed except white terrain, gray sky, and the increasingly desperate hope that he was still heading in the right direction. Just as dusk threatened to erase what little visibility remained, Darren spotted a faint yellow glow through the trees. Walter's porch light, a beacon in the gathering darkness. The small cabin sat isolated, nearly hidden beneath snow that had drifted against its walls. No tracks marred the pristine white blanket surrounding it, confirming what Darren already knew. No one had reached this place for days. "Mr. Deering," Darren called, pounding on the door with a gloved hand. "It's Darren King from the post office. I have your medication." Silence answered him. He tried the handle, locked. After circling the house, he found a window slightly ajar and managed to force it open further, scraping snow and ice away until he could hoist himself through. Inside, the cabin was nearly as cold as outside. A wood stove sat cold and empty in the corner. On the sofa, wrapped in what appeared to be every blanket in the house, lay Walter Deering, conscious but barely. His lips had a bluish tinge, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Darren rushed to Walter's side, gently placing the medication on the small table beside him. He knew time was running out. The storm outside continued to rage, but Darren's duty wasn't just to deliver mail. It was to save a life. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Respect doesn't need a badge. It just needs the right action at the right time. Darren had made the right decision, and he would not look back. The old man's eyes flickered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Mail comes through," he whispered with cracked lips. Darren immediately set to work, springing into action with a quiet urgency. He found the wood stacked beside the stove and kindled a fire, the crackling flames offering a tiny glimmer of warmth in the bitter cold. He melted snow for water, mixed the medication as prescribed, and helped Walter take it with small, careful sips. As the cabin slowly warmed, Darren found more blankets, set up a space heater that miraculously still functioned after he reset the circuit breaker, and even discovered canned soup in the pantry. With Walter's condition stabilizing, Darren's gaze fell on a folded American flag displayed in a wooden triangle case on the mantel. Beside it stood photographs, a younger Walter in uniform, another showing him with 3 other sailors aboard what appeared to be a submarine, and a third of him receiving a medal from a decorated officer. Below the mementos, a handwritten note rested quietly. "I am ready, but if there's a chance, I want to live." Darren tried calling emergency services again, but the signal was weak and flickered in and out. "We have your location," the dispatcher said after he explained the situation, "but we still can't get a vehicle up there. The main roads are our priority right now." "He needs medical attention," Darren insisted. "We understand," the dispatcher replied, "but there's nothing we can do until tomorrow at the earliest." Throughout the night, Darren kept the fire going, monitoring Walter's condition. He recorded vital signs on a notepad he found, and stayed vigilant, determined not to let the old man slip away. At some point, his phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor. Unauthorized absence from duty. Formal suspension. Pending review. Darren let out a sigh and set the phone down. Despite everything, his resolve didn't waver. As dawn approached and Walter rested more comfortably, the old man beckoned Darren closer. His voice was stronger now, though still faint. "Submarine rescue," Walter said, his words laden with memories. "That was my job. Lost 4 mates on my last mission. After that, nobody left to rescue me. Walter's grip on Darren's hand was surprisingly strong. Until now. Saved lives before. Never had mine saved. Until you. Darren's phone buzzed again. It was the local newspaper, requesting comment about the postal worker who abandoned his route to deliver medicine. Darren shut it off without responding. Some heroes don't need accolades. They just need someone to stay alive to prove that the right choice was made. By morning, the blizzard had weakened enough for Darren to assess the situation. Walter needed proper medical care beyond the emergency supplies Darren had on hand. Making another gut-wrenching decision, Darren fashioned a makeshift sled from a plastic storage container he found in Walter's shed, wrapped the elderly man in blankets, and began the grueling task of pulling him through the snow toward the nearest plowed road, a community center 2 miles away that had been converted into an emergency shelter. The journey took over 4 hours. The cold, the exhaustion, and the weight of his responsibility pressed down on Darren, but he pushed forward, step by step. When they finally reached the shelter, medical volunteers immediately took over, attending to Walter's condition. Darren collapsed into a chair, his body shaking from exhaustion and exposure, his muscles aching from the long trek. Once he recovered enough to stand, Darren called his mother to let her know he was safe. He then checked his messages. The news wasn't good. His supervisor had escalated the situation, sending a formal disciplinary notice. Darren had been accused of abandonment of postal duties, unauthorized handling of medication, and reckless endangerment of a federal employee during declared emergency conditions. The punishment: immediate suspension without pay, pending potential termination. Local news had already picked up the story, portraying it as either an act of heroism or irresponsible vigilantism. The community argued online, split between those who thought Darren was brave and those who believed he had been foolish. Some even questioned whether procedures existed for a reason, wondering if he should be fired or commended for his actions. When Darren returned home, his mother was waiting for him, her eyes swollen from crying. "Why do you always have to make things so difficult?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You could have died out there. And for what? Your job might be gone now. For what?" Darren sat in silence, his eyes tired but steadfast. Sometimes, the right thing to do isn't the easiest. It wasn't about the job or the rules. It was about a life that needed saving. In the heart of Montana, where harsh winters can freeze even the most resilient, Darren King, a young mail carrier, found himself in the midst of a life or death decision. The blizzard had already crippled the state, cutting off entire communities from help. And when Darren found a house buried in snow with an elderly war veteran inside, struggling to survive without the medications he desperately needed, he didn't hesitate. While the storm raged on, emergency services were stretched thin, and every protocol, every system in place failed. It was up to Darren to make a choice: follow the rules or do what was right. For 2 days, Darren nursed his frost-bitten fingers, quietly waiting for the hearing that would likely end his postal career. He avoided reporters, declining to justify his actions, because he believed the choice to act should speak louder than any explanation he could give. Meanwhile, across town, the governor of Montana was holding an emergency briefing about the state's response to the blizzard. Statistically, it seemed like a success. Roads cleared, power restored, emergency calls answered. But midway through the presentation, the governor paused, removed his glasses, and pulled out an envelope from his pocket. "I'd like to read something," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "This was hand-delivered to my office this morning by a man I had presumed was among our weather-related casualties." The room fell silent. The governor unfolded a single sheet of paper, and began reading aloud. I served this country for 26 years. I rescued men from submarines in waters cold enough to kill in minutes. I never left anyone behind. Yet when I needed help, your systems abandoned me. Your protocols nearly killed me. I am alive today, not because of your emergency response, but because a young man delivering mail decided I was worth saving, even at the cost of his job. If your laws and regulations don't protect the people who protect people like me, then I have lost faith in the country I once risked everything to defend. The letter was signed by Walter Deering, a retired Chief Petty Officer of the U.S. Navy. The briefing room was utterly still. The governor looked up, his expression grave. What Mr. Deering described was a systemic failure that no amount of statistical success can obscure, he said. Tomorrow, I will be signing Executive Order 413, establishing the Veteran Emergency Protocol, requiring priority response to at-risk veterans during weather emergencies, regardless of logistical challenges. The room murmured in surprise, but he wasn't finished. Additionally, I am ordering a full review of our emergency response procedures, particularly for rural and isolated residents. And I'm personally sending a letter to the United States Postal Service, recommending that Mr. Darren King not only be reinstated immediately, but also be commended for upholding the highest traditions of public service. The very next day, Walter Deering's health began to stabilize in the hospital, and Darren received a call reversing his suspension. The public outpouring of support had been overwhelming, and he was invited to a small ceremony where the governor would officially thank him for his actions. Standing in his postal uniform, hastily pressed for the occasion, Darren accepted the governor's handshake before the cameras. The applause echoed around him, but it was Walter, seated in a wheelchair nearby, who caught his attention. Motioning Darren closer, Walter whispered, "First time in my life I've been saved by someone who wasn't even in uniform." Darren smiled, his voice steady. "I was in uniform, sir. Just a different kind." He had been a part of something bigger than any uniform. He had been the human face in a cold, bureaucratic system. When systems fall silent, people without military uniforms often speak up through their actions. Darren had proven that one person's choice could change the course of history. Spring came early to Montana that year, melting away the harsh memories of winter. For Darren, life had taken an unexpected turn after what the locals simply called the Blizzard Rescue. The Postal Service, eager to capitalize on the positive attention Darren had generated, reassigned him to a new route. It was not officially labeled as such, but everyone knew its true purpose. Darren was now responsible for delivering to all the veterans' homes in the Northern District. The extra stops didn't bother him. In fact, they became the most meaningful part of his day. Each brief connection with these veterans, hearing their stories, and offering simple human interaction was more fulfilling than any formal recognition. Walter Deering's cabin, thanks to a veterans support organization, had undergone renovations. The cabin was now insulated properly, with a backup generator and satellite emergency beacon installed. Walter, ever the reserved man, had become a local celebrity of sorts. Yet, despite the attention, he still sat on his porch on days when the weather permitted, waiting for the mail truck's arrival. Tanan. On these days, Darren didn't just deliver the mail. He would sit for a few minutes, sharing coffee, listening to Walter's stories of service and survival, quiet reflections on duty and friendship. Inside Walter's cabin, atop his writing desk, sat two framed photographs. One was of his submarine crew, young men with serious expressions standing before their vessel. The other, a newer photo, captured Darren, smiling slightly with a mail bag over his shoulder and a prescription bag in his hand. Between the two photos sat a small brass plaque engraved with the words, "To be rescued is fortune." to be remembered is a miracle. The governor made good on his promises. The Veteran Emergency Protocol became state law, not just an executive order, ensuring that dedicated response teams, trained specifically to reach isolated veterans during emergencies, were established. Other states took notice, and within months, similar legislation appeared in Wyoming, Idaho, and the Dakotas. But perhaps the most significant change was the flood of letters Walter began receiving from veterans across the country. Some shared similar stories of isolation. Others offered support or simply connection. Walter responded to each letter with care, filling pages with his reflections on service, survival, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. One letter in particular made its way to the state capitol, where it was framed and hung in the governor's office. "Your new protocol didn't just save one old sailor," the letter read. "It restored faith for those of us who sometimes wonder if our service is remembered when uniforms come off. This mail carrier didn't just deliver medicine. He delivered proof that someone still sees us as worth saving." Darren never sought recognition. He continued delivering mail with the same quiet efficiency, even though now his neighbors waved more frequently, and children sometimes pointed as his truck passed. When asked about his actions during the blizzard, he would simply shrug and redirect the conversation. But occasionally, when pressed by younger carriers about why he took such risks, Darren would pause thoughtfully before answering, because somewhere between what the rules require and what humanity demands, that's where you find out who you really are. Some people never step onto a battlefield, yet they save lives through simple kindness. Amid freezing cold and the indifference of entire systems, one person's choice can change everything. When I first heard about Darren, I thought of my neighbor growing up, a quiet mailman who never missed a delivery, even during storms. He once brought my mom's heart medication through 4 blocks of blackout. We never thanked him properly. Darren's story reminded me that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear mailbags and just keep walking. If this made you think of someone who did the right thing quietly, send this to them and let them know the world still notices. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to make a difference.